Does India require any storytelling about its integration? In one sense, India doesn't require any story about its integration because the story of the life of India is all about integration. We have understood as one place where minds have united in common pursuits. The sages of our country belonging to different understandings of life. The Vedas talk about the paths are many, the end is one. They all talk about it in so many wonderful, profound ways. So for India, the integration is not something which has to be preserved, but only to be propagated. We need to propagate how India became integrated, not by coercion, not by violence, not by imposition, not by colonization of mind and place. So the integration story of India stands very, very differently. Therefore, we need to propagate it. How do we propagate it? Therefore, I think books of this nature will offer one glimpse about why we still need to talk about integration. Many of us who have not been born in this country before independence are unfortunate in one sense that we not really witnessed the 2 or 3 decades before independence. This country went through a transformation. Europe was trying to communicate with us and several what's so-called secular ideas and tried to tell us that secular ideas, which are a product of a long line of, let's say, war of crusades in Europe. The two faiths fought like each other in Europe for more than 200 to 300 years. So the West was trying to tell us that we are going to tell you what is best for you by way of a secular understanding of life. And that was a wrong attempt on the part of West to tell us. But we still borrowed certain ideas in order that we are able to strengthen our understanding of what individual life and collective life can be in the midst of diversities. So therefore we borrowed slowly in the 2 to 3 decades before independence, and which is what is captured very beautifully in the later part of this book, that the so-called ideas of living with the Constitution and the Constitution making ideas in different parts of a country, and the great visionary mind of Sardar Patel to bring about a sea change in the understanding of the minds of kings, rulers, small and big, to think beyond their little areas where they were ruling. The ability to think beyond that was therefore one important constitutional development in our country. So when I found that that's thought to be captured here, I think it's a very important way of looking at it. Books written about constitutional history of India, as students of law, we find a textbook or so will tell us everything began after East India Company landed here, as if East India Company is the origin of Indian history. As students of law, we only study that. But I suppose with books like this, our law universities and law schools will turn a little away from this very limited edition of understanding Indian history and to have larger editions of understanding our history. And that's very important. I'm not talking from any sectarian point of view. As I said, there are lots of new young writers on Indian history today. Why is it that they are in the field? Because for quite some time, we have seen history being written from a very, again, ideological point of view or some sectarian point of view. Or you had some ideas of history about writing only about events, people, and not the connecting thread between events, people, places. So for a proper history, geography, sociology, culture, religion, faith, all those connecting threads, if they're not properly perceived and connected, I think that history is no history at all. So we have a lot of young writers who are coming up to tell us about what India means to the rest of the world. If you look at the genre of literature about history, between the 1900s, late 1900s and even the early 20th century. Look at the titles of those books. Edward Gibbon writes the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. There are other books which talk about the rise and fall of the Third Reich. One European historian wrote a book called The Decline of the West, Oswald Spengler. So we write this genre of literature in the, both before and after the First and Second World War, which are looking at the lack of cohesiveness in the lives of people in the rest of the world, despite the great and courageous efforts being made by people in different parts of Europe to make sense about their life. For quite some time after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 from Russia, good part of Europe was in the pale shadow of one particular ideology. And there were occupations, colonizations by coercion, violence, and so on and so forth. And therefore, when violence, coercion, anything which is opposed to satyagraha and non-violence happens in people's life or history of nation, then there is something very fundamentally wrong in that place. That is what our tradition, our culture, the pursuit of the ends of life has taught us. That's why in one sense, Gandhiji, when he said satyagraha, it's a very profound concept. And that runs through, I think, the entire fabric of Bharatiya history. But I told him on a lighter way, in that, look here, you only looked at the northern part of India. Maybe your focus was on Jammu and Kashmir. Your deep engagement in the liberation of Jammu and Kashmir made you ignore the rest of the country. Maybe he will write about it very soon. When K. N. Nilakanta Sastri wrote about the history of South India, there are other writers who wrote about the Vijayanagara Empire and much beyond that. Today, archaeological discoveries connect Mohenjo-daro with some parts in Madurai in South Tamil Nadu. So history will now begin to be rewritten not merely by chronicles and narrations of accounts led by somebody or the other, but by looking at it through lens of science and technology as well. That's maybe another important chapter of writing history. I think to be a historian is a very difficult task. To be a writer today is an easy task. Any one of us can become a writer and write on anything you like, whether you have understood the subject or not. But to be a historian is a very difficult task. So I'm so glad that my former chambermate is now both a writer and a historian. I congratulate him for this very wonderful first step on his journey towards many, many such accomplishments. What does the book launch mean? It's not merely people who are addressed by the writer or the author of the book. It's not merely his sharing why he wrote the book or what the book means. It's something beyond that. Again, it all depends on what the book is about. So we find the wide genre of literature today, as I said. But in a book launch on a book like this, which talks about more than 5,000 years of our Bharatiya life. History is all about life. Life of a nation, life of people, and life of both. So when a book like this is thought to be launched, the author intends to connect with each and every one of you and our own thoughts and understanding of what we mean by being part of this great nation. So it's a connecting thread. It's not merely a monologue, it's a dialogue. The dialogue flows from both sides, and I suppose that's how books like this will become important in nation's life. When he began writing this book, he came and placed this manuscript on my table and wanted some comments. I told him I am least equipped and competent to offer any comment on a book like this, because I am not a historian. I like to read history, of course. Many of us like to read history, sometimes superficially, sometimes for practical purposes, and sometimes beyond all these utilitarian considerations, because we want to know something beyond our own life. The limited editions of our life, we want to know something beyond that. So when you place this, I said, I have my reservation to offer any comment on this book. But I found after a couple of days, it was so inviting to get into the depths of the pages of his manuscript that I thought here is something very different and unique. But what made me so glad is that what I would not have done, he is able to do that. So I'm so glad that he has become part of the Writer Club of India and occupying called the History Writer Club of India. Day before yesterday, when he came to invite me for today's event, I told him most likely I'm traveling today evening, I may not be able to come. So he sent promptly all set of people to have my speech recorded. But it was so that I couldn't travel today evening, and certainly I couldn't decline his invitation to be part of here. And I feel so happy that I couldn't travel today evening. Whether he is, of course, he's going to be very happy about it. But why do we talk about integration, political and constitutional? So we have a very auspicious day today in the life of Yashraj, and we are happy to be part of untying the ribbon, not cutting the ribbon, because cutting the ribbon means not uniting, untying means to tie it once again. So we will tie it once again as and when you are able to continue to venture on your writing journey. I just wish to conclude saying that today the life of the nation is seen from various angles, perspectives. Critics from various angles try to give new narrations, versions of what India ought to be. And when you want to say something about what India ought to be, you have to go back from the point of what India has been. So unless you know what India has been, you cannot say what India ought to be. So there is some school of thought which says we can close our eyes to what India has been, but we will say what India ought to be. I think they are mistaken. So we need people like Yashraj who will find out what India has been and what India has truly been. I congratulate him once again, and I thank you all for being today evening with me, and thus let us march together as part of a political and constitutional integration, because today politics and constitution are one blend. Without constitution there can be no politics, and without politics abiding by the constitution there can be no politics. So the new blend of politics and constitutional law, we need to have more and more writings, and I think probably anyone among you would be on the journey of writing such wonderful stories about India. Thank you for your attention.